The air inside the operations room is thick with cigarette smoke and stale sweat. A single red bulb hangs over the chart table, casting long shadows across the Pacific. Outside, the lagoon is calm. Too calm. The kind of stillness that makes seasoned naval officers uneasy. Captain Takahashi Masao taps ash into a porcelain tray and leans over the map. His finger traces a line east of the Marianas. Nothing there. Again. A young intelligence lieutenant clears his throat. No confirmed carrier sightings, sir. A ripple of quiet amusement moves through the room. Vice Admiral Mainichi Koga does not smile, but several of his staff officers do. Softly, almost indulgently. Another phantom fleet, someone murmurs. A few chuckles, not loud, not disrespectful, just confident. Because only a year ago at Midway, 4 American fleet carriers burned and sank in a single morning. Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, Huryu. The Imperial Japanese Navy had paid dearly, but the Americans had paid more. Their carrier force, once dangerous, had been shattered. At least that was the belief. Koga straightens, adjusting the crease in his uniform. The Americans are finished with decisive battles, he says calmly. They will rebuild slowly, cautiously. He pauses, letting the words settle. They do not understand carrier warfare as we do. Heads nod around the table. These men were raised on the gospel of Kantai-Kessen, the decisive fleet engagement. Carriers were precious weapons, complex instruments requiring elite pilots, years of training, and perfect timing. You did not replace them quickly. You could not. The Americans, they believed, would learn that lesson the hard way. And yet, a door slides open. A communications officer enters, face pale. He bows quickly, then hands over a decoded intercept. The paper trembles slightly. Koga reads it once, then again. He does not laugh. The report is fragmentary. A convoy sighted, unusual air cover, multiple flight decks. The silhouette sketches are crude, drawn by exhausted reconnaissance pilots returning at dusk, but they show something unsettling. Longer hulls. Wider decks. Elevators on the center line and edges. Not Yorktowns, not Enterprises. Something else. Probably misidentification, Captain Takahashi says quickly. American pilots exaggerate. Someone else adds, they only have a handful of carriers left, 2, maybe 3. More nodding, more certainty. Koga folds the paper carefully. Dismissed, he says. But that night he does not sleep. Thousands of miles away, in Newport News, Virginia, the night shift is just beginning. The lights inside dry dock number 8 blaze like a small city. Sparks cascade from steel plates as riveters hammer in unison. Rat-tat-tat, rat-tat-tat, an industrial heartbeat that never stops. The air smells of oil, saltwater, and hot metal. A hull rises from the dock like a steel cliff. Painted on its bow in fresh white letters, CV-10. USS Yorktown. Not the one sunk at Midway. Another Yorktown. Bigger, heavier, faster. An Essex-class aircraft carrier. A foreman checks his clipboard, shouting over the noise. We're 3 days ahead of schedule. Keep it moving. No one cheers. They don't have time. Across the country, in Brooklyn Navy Yard, another hull takes shape. In Philadelphia, another. On the West Coast, another still. Keel after keel, deck after deck. While Japanese officers debate silhouettes, American shipyards are quietly solving a different problem. How to build carriers the way Detroit builds cars. Back at Truck, August bleeds into September. Reconnaissance reports grow stranger. American carriers appear near the Gilberts, then the Marshalls. They are hit, damaged but not sunk. Weeks later they appear again, sometimes with new air groups, sometimes with unfamiliar markings. Japanese pilots return shaken. They are faster than before, one lieutenant reports. Their decks are longer. They launch aircraft more quickly. Another adds they absorb damage. Fires are contained, they keep fighting. This is not how carriers are supposed to behave. In the ready room, veteran aviators whisper to younger pilots, "These are not the same ships we faced in 1942. Still, the senior staff remains outwardly confident. Quantity does not equal quality, an operations officer insists. American pilots are inferior. Their carriers will fall like the others. But the laughter is thinner now, more forced. And then comes November 1943. Tarawa. American carriers mass offshore, more than expected. Far more. Flight decks stretch across the horizon. Aircraft rise in continuous waves, one launch bleeding seamlessly into the next. Japanese defenders fight ferociously. They inflict casualties. They damage ships. But the carriers do not withdraw. They rotate. One pulls back, another takes its place. Like a conveyor belt. Admiral Koga stands aboard his flagship, binoculars pressed to his eyes, watching the distant smudge of smoke and aircraft. "How many?" he asks quietly. No one answers at first. Finally, an aide speaks. "We believe at least 8, possibly more." 8. Fleet carriers. Operational. In one theater. Koga lowers the binoculars. His face is unreadable. For the first time since Midway, a terrible thought takes shape, slowly, reluctantly. What if sinking carriers no longer decides the war? What if destroying fleets is no longer enough? That night, alone in his cabin, Koga spreads out the latest intelligence summaries, production estimates, launch dates, repair timelines. He runs the numbers again. And again. They do not change. The Americans are not rebuilding. They are multiplying. And for the first time, an Imperial Japanese Navy raised to defeat ships begins to sense something far worse. They are no longer fighting sailors. They are fighting factories. And those factories never sleep. The horizon glows faintly pink as the first American strike lifts off the deck. Engines roar in sequence, Hellcats, Heldovers, Avengers, rolling forward with mechanical precision. The deck crews move like clockwork, colored jerseys flashing, hands signaling, bodies ducking under spinning propellers. To a Japanese reconnaissance pilot watching from altitude, it feels unreal. The carrier below him is massive, longer than anything he has seen before. Its deck is crowded yet orderly. Aircraft launch without pause. There is no frantic scrambling, no delay between cycles. He keys his radio. Enemy carrier large class, launching continuously. A burst of static. Then silence. Minutes later, anti-aircraft fire reaches up like claws. Thick, accurate. The pilot banks hard, heart hammering. He snaps photos, then dives away, barely escaping the wall of steel. When he lands hours later, shaking and drenched in sweat, the intelligence officers study his film in grim quiet. The silhouette is unmistakable now. Essex-class. Vice Admiral Mainichi Koga listens as the briefing unfolds. Names are spoken carefully, as if saying them too loudly might summon more. USS Essex, USS Yorktown, USS Lexington, USS Bunker Hill. Carriers thought damaged weeks earlier are back, not repaired, rebuilt. Their flight decks look untouched, their air groups larger than before. How long between damage and return? Koga asks. A pause. Sometimes less than a month, sir. The room tightens. Japanese doctrine had assumed that even a wounded carrier would be out of action for half a year. Dockyard queues, material shortages, skilled labor, bottlenecks. That assumption is dying. Koga dismisses the staff and remains alone, staring at a chalkboard filled with numbers. Aircraft production, pilot losses, ship counts. He erases a column with the flat of his hand. The problem is no longer tactical. It is mathematical. Across the Pacific, the answer lies not in a single battle, but in repetition. At Pearl Harbor, damaged Essex-class carriers slide into dry docks already stocked with pre-cut steel plates. Replacement parts wait on shelves, tagged and inventoried. Entire sections of wiring, plumbing, and deck plating are swapped like components. A Navy Yard officer times the process with a stopwatch. Damage control teams ready, go. Crews swarm the hull, welders spark, cranes swing. By the time Japanese intelligence updates its estimates, the ship is already leaving harbor. Back at sea, American pilots barely have time to learn their ship's name before they are launching again. The Essex-class design makes this possible. Redundant power systems, armored flight decks without crippling weight, fire mains arranged so a single hit does not doom the ship, elevators positioned to keep aircraft moving even under attack. These are not elegant ships. They are brutal, practical machines. Built to be hit. Built to survive. Built to return. In January 1944, Koga receives a consolidated report from Naval Intelligence. It includes shipyard output estimates, carrier hulls under construction, projected launch dates. The figures are staggering. One line is underlined twice. New fleet carriers expected operational. 1944, at least 15. Koga sits back slowly. 15. Even if Japan sinks one every month, a heroic assumption, the balance never shifts. He thinks back to Midway, to the burning decks, to the belief that carriers were irreplaceable. That belief is now a liability. The first cracks show in Japanese planning. Operations are delayed, waiting for the right moment that never comes. Carrier task forces are held back, preserved like fragile heirlooms. Pilots are rotated less frequently, flown harder. Because every loss now feels permanent. Meanwhile, the Americans rotate ships like chess pieces. One Essex departs, another arrives. Always fresh. Always ready. Always more. At a staff meeting in February, an officer dares to say it aloud. Even if we win tactically, he says carefully, we may still lose strategically. The room goes silent. Koga closes his eyes for a brief moment. Then he nods. Later that evening, he writes a private memorandum. It is not meant for propaganda, not meant to inspire. It is meant to be honest. The enemy's strength lies not in individual ships, he writes, but in their ability to replace them without pause. We are engaged in a war of production. He hesitates, brush hovering. Then adds the final line. This is a war Japan cannot win by naval skill alone. The realization is devastating, not because it questions Japanese courage, but because it renders courage insufficient. Skill sacrifice, discipline. None of it can outpace an assembly line. As 1944 unfolds, the pattern becomes impossible to ignore. American carriers appear in pairs, then groups, then entire armadas, each offensive larger than the last, each one supported by fresh hulls with unfamiliar names. Japanese pilots shoot down aircraft, only to see more rise from the deck minutes later. Ships burn, but replacements arrive before the smoke clears. At truck, officers stop asking, how many carriers do they have? They begin asking, how many can we possibly sink? And no one likes the answer. Because somewhere beyond the horizon, another Essex-class carrier is already steaming west. Engines turning. Deck crews waiting. Factories humming. And the laughter that once echoed around the chart table has vanished, replaced by something colder. The sound of inevitability. The sea is deceptively calm, a vast blue mirror stretching to the horizon. From the bridge of a Japanese carrier, Officers scan the distance through binoculars, searching for the American fleet. They find it, and then they realize the mistake. What they see is not a task force. It is a wall. Carrier after carrier sits on the horizon, flight decks aligned like factory floors floating on water. Smoke trails mark constant launch cycles. Aircraft rise in layered formations, climbing, banking, vanishing into the sun. An officer whispers, almost to himself, "How many are there?" No one answers. Counting feels pointless. This is the opening of what will later be called the Battle of the Philippine Sea. But in this moment, it feels less like a battle and more like a demonstration. Vice Admiral Gisaburo Azawa stands silently, hands clasped behind his back. He knows the plan. He approved it. Strike first. Strike hard. Use range and skill to offset numbers. But numbers matter. And today numbers feel endless. Japanese aircraft launch in disciplined waves. Pilots are briefed carefully. Fuel is measured to the liter. Every plane must count. Across the sea, American Essex-class carriers launch again. And again. And again. Deck crews barely pause to wipe oil from their hands. Elevators cycle continuously. The rhythm never breaks. An American officer glances at his watch. Next strike in 5. There is no tension in his voice. They have time. They have ships. They have replacements. Japanese pilots fly into a storm of radar-guided interception. Hellcats swarm them at altitude, directed calmly from carriers that sit safely beyond visual range. Veteran aviators fight desperately, twisting, firing, diving through flak and tracer fire. Some score victories. Many do not return. Those who survive land on carriers already crowded with wounded aircraft and exhausted crews. They look around. There are fewer planes than when they left. Across the ocean, American pilots land, refuel, rearm, and prepare to launch again. By evening, the outcome is unavoidable. Hundreds of Japanese aircraft are gone. The American carriers are untouched. Not damaged. Not even threatened. The Essex-class carriers remain where they are, decks still alive with motion. When the reports reach headquarters, the language is careful, restrained. Losses heavy. Enemy strength overwhelming. Operational capability compromised. Koga reads between every line. This is no longer a contest of doctrine. It is arithmetic. In the days that follow, Japanese naval staff attempt to recalibrate. New tactics, dispersal, night attacks, preservation of remaining carriers. But each solution runs into the same wall. Time. Japan cannot replace pilots fast enough. Cannot replace ships at all. The Americans, meanwhile, rotate Essex-class carriers out of combat not because they are crippled, but because they are scheduled. Scheduled for rest. Scheduled for refit. Scheduled for the next operation. It is industrial warfare, executed with military precision. In private conversations, officers begin to speak differently. "We must avoid losing carriers," one says. Another responds quietly, "We must avoid fighting them at all." The implication hangs heavy in the air. If you cannot destroy the enemy's strength, you must outlast it. But how do you outlast a nation that builds carriers faster than you can sink them? By late 1944, American carrier groups appear off the Philippines, then Okinawa. Each time the formations are larger. Each time the Essex-class hulls form the backbone, reliable, familiar, unstoppable. Japanese intelligence tracks hull numbers, but the figures feel abstract now. The carriers blur together, a continuous presence rather than individual ships. One sinks. Another takes its place. In a quiet moment, Admiral Koga confides to a close aide. "We trained for decades to fight fleets," he says. "We mastered it." He looks out at the sea. But no one taught us how to fight a factory. The aide does not respond. There is nothing left to say. Because the realization has settled in fully now, heavy and inescapable. The war was not lost in a single battle. It was lost the moment American industry found its rhythm, and the Essex-class began to roll off the line. One after another. Relentless. Unstoppable. And still, somewhere beyond the horizon, another carrier is steaming forward, its deck crowded with aircraft, its hull still smelling of fresh paint. The war is entering its final phase. And Japan no longer controls its fate. The sea is black and glassy, broken only by the wakes of warships moving without lights. On the bridge of a Japanese cruiser, officers speak in whispers. Every man knows this is the last throw of the dice. Below decks, engine rooms vibrate with restrained power. Above, the sky waits. This is Shogo 1, Japan's final, desperate plan to shatter the American invasion of the Philippines. The strategy is bold, intricate, and brutally honest. Sacrifice the remaining carriers as bait. Draw the American fast carriers north. Clear the way for a surface strike. No one pretends the carriers are meant to survive. They are no longer weapons. They are decoys. Far to the east, American Essex-class carriers cruise in disciplined formation. Radar screens glow softly. Fighter direction officers sip coffee as they watch blips move across the scope. Another launch cycle begins. On deck, a young sailor tightens the straps on a Hellcat pilot's parachute. "Good hunting," he says casually. The pilot grins, "Be back in an hour." Neither of them doubts it. Japanese carrier decks tell a different story. Aircraft are few, pilots are young or old. Some have less than 100 hours of flight time. Others have flown since China, their faces lined, their hands steady but tired. They take off knowing the truth. This is not Midway. This is not Coral Sea. This is an ending. When American fighters intercept them, the sky fills with contrails and fire. Radar guides the intercepts with cruel efficiency. Hellcats arrive in numbers that feel unfair. Japanese formations disintegrate. By mid-morning, the carrier air groups that once defined the Imperial Navy are gone. The decoys have served their purpose, and they are no longer needed. When Admiral William Halsey takes the bait and races north, his carriers surge forward at flank speed. Essex-class engines thunder, hulls cutting through the Pacific with relentless confidence. They find the Japanese carriers, and they annihilate them. Not with drama, not with suspense, with procedure. Strike groups launch, bombs fall, fires spread. One carrier after another slows, burns, and stops. The Americans do not linger. There is always another target. Always another sortie. In the aftermath, as reports flood in, Japanese headquarters absorbs the truth in numb silence. Carrier losses total. Air groups destroyed. Strategic effect negligible. Because even this sacrifice, this carefully calculated gambit, has not changed the balance. The American invasion continues. The Essex-class carriers return to station. Vice Admiral Mainichi Koga does not live to see the end of the war, but the conclusion he reached echoes through every decision made afterward. Japan is not losing because its sailors lack courage. They are losing because the enemy can replace loss with output. Where Japan counts hulls, America counts schedules. Where Japan mourns ships, America commissions new ones. By 1945, American carriers patrol the waters off Japan itself. Essex-class decks launch strikes against the home islands. Factories burn, airfields crater. For Japanese civilians looking up at the sky, the carriers are invisible, but their presence is constant. A distant hum. A promise of more to come. In American shipyards, the work continues even as victory approaches. Essex-class carriers are still being completed, still being trained, still being prepared. Because that is how the system works. It does not stop for hope. It does not stop for fear. It does not stop for victory. The laughter that once filled Japanese chart rooms in 1943 is long gone. In its place is a sober understanding, written quietly into post-war histories. The Imperial Japanese Navy was not defeated by a single ship, or a single battle, or even a single class of carrier. It was defeated by a nation that learned how to turn steel, labor, and time into an unstoppable force. A nation that built ships faster than they could be destroyed. And once that realization set in, the outcome was no longer in doubt.